Good morning. It's 10:50 a.m. on Friday, June 7th, at least in Victoria, BC. And I'm here again with my dear friend, Dr. Eleanor. Um, how are you doing this morning? I mean, we've already checked in, but
Yeah,
tell the
I'm doing great.
cool.
Lots of stuff going on,
Yeah,
a lot of fun, a lot
yeah.
of
We
new
did.
things.
We did an update on. I think we met on Monday. So, anything else you want to update on this week, or anything that came from that webinar yesterday that stood out to you?
Um, Not especially, except that um, I'm getting ready to teach, and it's very clear to me as I keep teaching that the concept of the four worlds and how to move between them is so important for people to learn and master because it will make everybody's life so much easier.
Hmm.
And so many people actually want to be in their spirit, and the pain is from not living from spirit. So
Hmm.
when people begin to embrace that, there's transformation and their life gets so much easier.
Yeah. Even as I breathe in that energy because that's how it feels. Um, yeah, I think that's where we should go today. We kind of been talking about energy, chi, moving between the four worlds, and we were talking part also about how people that have been in human design for a while are still caught in the mind, and I am or was. I feel like it's detaching, but here I am 3.5 years into my experiment, and I've sort of hit a wall recently. I don't even know if I mentioned it to you this week about this, but I've said to a few people, like, for a while there, I wanted to put the genie back in the bottle. It was too much information. It was overwhelming. It was all these things. But I've been going through quite a personal and physical evolution the last couple of months. Coincides both with meeting you, but also finally respecting my body, like more so than before,
Mhm.
and um, really leaning into movement in so many ways. And I keep running into people, they're finding me, like the fractal. They're finding me and teaching me, and keep kind of hinting at me, like, remember to breathe, remember to move your body. And as I reflect on my life to date, I have resisted all those things, even though I knew they were important. And so much so that I've actually recently realized that when I concentrate, I hold my breath. So if I were
Mm.
lifting weights, I would hold my breath. If I were, when I play drums, I would hold my breath. And that makes it very difficult to sing. So I always struggled singing, even though I wanted to, right? Because my posture was bad. And so it's agonizing and frustrating to me to realize that here I am at 52 going, oh, breathing's important. Oh, stretching's important. Like, it just sounds ridiculous to me. And all my life, people said it to me, but I think when I heard it from people, I just thought, oh, that's advice for everyone. I do it. Breathing's natural. But I never actually, I kind of realize now people are, like, through spirit saying to me, dude, breathe, dude, move.
Well, it depends how somebody tells you to breathe
Mhm.
and where the energy of it resonates with you.
Mhm.
So to say to somebody, and parents say to their kids all the time, sit up straight or take a breath or relax or any of that stuff, but there's no instruction, there's nothing that makes it easy, and it isn't easy. I find in looking at my clients' charts, I'll often say to someone, breathing is very important for you because it's when you begin to feel your breathing shift, it means you're picking energy up from someone else. And so there's, I'm giving them something to look for, something that they can actually experiment with.
Hmm.
And all it takes is picking up energy from someone and feeling the chest get tight and to realize you're not breathing, to think, oh, this is important for me.
Hmm.
But in a void, to say breathing's important, what difference does it make?
Hmm. Or even just explain why. Like I've always cared why. You know, when parents are just like, straighten up, tell me why. And unfortunately, and I think maybe it's generational. You know, my generation, the one before me, was the veteran generation, and from everything I understand from that, the idea is you respect your elders even if they're wrong, right? Like just respect them because they've been around longer. And I think I've definitely gone through my own process where I because I grew up in that range, I didn't actually respect the opinions of people younger than me. I couldn't hear them because it was almost like, you know, my grandparents earned this right to be heard. It's now my turn. And so I was missing out on all these amazing people that had all these amazing things to share, right? And like it took a while to go through that and go like, holy shit, I'm doing that. Why am I doing that, right? It was quite a startling discovery at the time because I didn't realize how deeply rooted it was and how overwhelming that lack of awareness, not overwhelming,
See,
but just
now in human design, that would have been called conditioning.
hmm.
It's not conditioning, it's socialization.
Hmm.
It's learning your culture. And obviously, you grew up in a very specific culture
Hmm.
with one of its values being respect your elders and don't talk back to them.
Hmm.
Um, I grew up in a culture in my family where the line that I kept hearing from my parents was, do what you think is right, we trust you.
That's
Uh,
empowering.
it was empowering.
Yeah.
Um, and there were no rules. I grew up with no rules, no responsibilities, um, other than being honest and being caretaking and compassionate and doing what felt right for me.
Hmm.
And when my siblings, I'm the youngest of five, when my siblings would, especially my older brother, would say, she should get a job, my mother would say, leave her alone.
That's cool.
Uh, and so the truth is, other than teaching college for 3 years, I've never worked a day in my life because I've only done what was right for me.
Hmm.
And that's a gift that we ideally give to our children and to each other, is the empowerment of not imposing anything on anyone, giving each individual the freedom to be who they are and to trust their inner sense of knowledge and to put that before what we impose upon them.
Hmm. So it sounds like you had a supportive upbringing. Um, I was curious your comment about a sister saying, you know, why don't you get a job, and then mom stepping in. Did all siblings sort of follow the path? Like, was it a family spiritual vibe? Was your Kundalini experience unique to you?
Um, I didn't grow up with an especially easy childhood.
Yeah, I didn't
Um,
imply that, or I don't mean to imply that. I just mean,
yeah.
yeah.
But um, no, my brother was the one who said she should get a job.
Mm,
And he was mean. He was downright mean, and uh, taught me how to disengage from external misperceptions of who I was. And in fact, he was very intellectual and very in his head and not at all spiritual. And when when I was doing my astrology stuff, he at one point said to me, "Well, El, how can you do this? You of all people." And I looked at him, I said, "How could you not? You
mm,
know, how can you be so closed minded um, and such an engineer scientist?" And he was the head of a dream lab
mm,
and doing all kinds of studies, but very strict. You know, there was no room for spirit,
mm,
no room for the esoteric aspects of the research. And that's just doesn't work.
mm. I think I was more like him before. Certainly, no connection to spirit, and even now, like think I mentioned it a lot. It's I have this not pessimistic, but like I'm still learning to trust. But I'm
Well, Sean, don't you see God's hand in things?
yeah, lately, yeah.
So, have you had any experiences of God's hand in the last week?
That's a curious question. For a while there seemed to be nothing, and it was like, I can get in my head and be like, what am I doing wrong? Am I forgetting to breathe? What is it? But no, there in the last couple of days, although all of a sudden it's like it's vacated from my mind, but I know there's been little synchronicities, little um, one thing that I'm starting to realize or recognize is that if I'm in conversation with someone and I'm truly there, present in the moment, like really just enjoying the conversation, even to the point of just being like the person I'm talking to, no matter what the topic is, they're the most interesting person in the world. That's kind of how I approach things now. Because I used to avoid small talk. It was just, I didn't, connection was painful for me. Um, and sometimes the conversation won't be that interesting, but I'll stick it out because there's always something there. And honestly, sometimes it's like the person in the middle of sharing something that's kind of interesting, they'll look me straight in the eye and almost like a projection be like, and da 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 da. And whatever that it is that they said was like, oh man, that was the message I was waiting for. And and learning to trust that pattern, learning to have faith in that pattern. Because before it was happened so seldomly, it was just like, oh, that's weird, and then I would dismiss it because the other evidence in my life didn't stack up. But there's definitely a shift happening, and
And
one of
where
the
is that shift coming from?
where's it coming from? Can you ask that question differently?
The shift you feel, what kind of shift is that shift? Inside you or outside of you?
Ooh, good question. Both. One is a feeling inside. Sometimes it's an uncomfortable feeling, like I'm getting asked a question that makes me uncomfortable because I know I'm about to share something real. I can just feel it coming, and it's like, oof, there's that discomfort um, that I used to avoid. I didn't like it, and now it in the moment I'm realizing it's the best feeling. It's new, but externally there's a feeling too, like an energetic. I feel like I can feel my aura a bit,
Mm.
and stems. That wasn't there before. And, I think one of the things I'd love to work, I think what I imagine we'll segue into is that energy flow. And, I did another Qigong session this morning to start the day with Heather, and it was amazing. Like, amazing. And I was pushing energy away. I was as I was pushing, I was reflecting on yesterday and where that energy came from. And yeah, I I felt I can honestly say, despite the fact that I was the best dad I could be, all these things, I wasn't there. I wasn't present. I wasn't in my body. I was making do. You know, I was going through the motions because that's all I knew. So yeah, it's a strange, often uncomfortable, but a feeling that I'm
So,
starting
are
to.
you saying if we think about it in terms of the four worlds, that you were not consciously aware of the multidimensional nature of who you are, and therefore you were not perceiving the nuances of your energy body,
Yeah,
and they were not factoring in to your choices and your decision making?
yeah, no, it was all mind. It was all, you know,
Mental.
in my experience, from what I remember, this is the path to take, and it was very black and white. It certainly wasn't willing to even try something new.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, over the last couple of years, where this kind of started was, I feel like it was reading the book Power of Habit or Power of Now or whatever, and it kind of talked about just like if life isn't working for you, take a left at the stoplights, go to a different coffee shop, get a different drink. Like it was that basic level of change that I had to do because I really was in a one lane. I was just, the same lane, same choices, the same results.
You know, we're not taught, Sean, to function in four worlds. We're
Mhm.
taught to function in the mental world. And the mental world doesn't touch our soul.
Yeah.
So, what you're describing is living on the surface, but not giving yourself permission to be whole
Hmm.
and to bring your whole being into a situation
Hmm.
because it was dangerous.
Hmm. And what I'm realizing definitely is a worthiness. Like I didn't feel worthy ever. Um, I don't know if I said this to you, but it was this week. I realized like if I were to give percentages, I would have said old Sean felt 30% worthy, but it was a flat line. Like it didn't matter what situation I was in, I was 30% worthy.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I decondition or at least evolve and get empowered, it's now this huge, uh, like it sometimes the worthiness can be zero. And I think it's just because I'm making changes and experiencing things and there's an impact to making new choices. But the worthiness can also be like 99, 100, at which point it's
So,
like mine
Sean,
ever.
what is worthy?
What does it mean to me?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I thought I would have been able to answer that right away.
And where
What?
does it come from?
Oh, it's right here. It's like solar plexus. Um,
Solar plexus is emotional.
mhm. So if your
So,
question is like emotional worthiness, like are you implying that's where I'm stuck, or
well,
that's
you
it's?
identified that you were not worthy.
Mhm.
So, given that it's solar plexus, and we know emotional reactivity is only in the mental and the physical worlds,
Right? No solar plexus in the emotional world, right? Okay.
because emotions must be transformed. So, you identified you weren't worthy, and it just sat until you decided to transform it.
Hmm. Yeah, I even transformed it a little last night. There's a fella, Craig Beck, and he does these hypnosis tracks on Audible, and so I bought a bunch of them because they're really effective, but I went for the ones that I thought I understood: anxiety, fear, um, public speaking. But for whatever reason, last night I started looking for things that kind of resonated. So there's one on claustrophobia, and having a conversation with my friend, I was like, "Oh my god, I don't even like being in an elevator, for more than 20 seconds." And I could never imagine myself ever being an astronaut and being in a spacecraft. Like just the thought of that. So I was like, holy cow, there's something there. That one was interesting. The other one I bought though was shyness. And that was like giggling to myself in that hypnosis, right? I was in that state but I was like, oh my God, what are you saying there? I can't believe that might be my core issue was shyness. After doing all this stuff last night, it was like comical to me. And I kind of woke up this morning a bit of a new man, like sort of a little more uh, spring in my step, I guess. Like I didn't realize I was shy, or at least how he packaged it up in the hypnosis. I don't even think he even mentioned shyness in it. By the time you get there and get to that state, it was more like the things he said. I was like, oh my God, this is this is like exactly what I need to hear right now. So that was very interesting. And I don't know if shyness is tied to worthiness, but like I remember, and again, I was
So,
kind of in
Sean, I want to point out to you that that's God's hand.
as in I chose to seek
Listen
that
to
out.
something
Mhm.
that you didn't think was your issue, but you were driven to do it by some force beyond your mind.
100%. I mean, I agree with that totally. I think even 3 weeks ago, I would have been like, no, it was, but yeah, no, I'm with you. Yeah, I think my inside voice is my voice. Like I'll hear myself saying, do this. And so, but I'm only starting to listen to that now. For whatever reason.
Pay attention to the nuances of the inner voice.
Mhm.
It's not one note. And it has different nuances and frequencies. And so you want to learn which frequency is really aligned with you and which one is okay, but not ideal.
Yeah, I'm going to have to really think about that because that voice right now is so subtle, and that inside negative voice can overstep so.
Well, but every day in our life, we do things that are not the ideal
Mhm.
by the nature of living in a culture.
Yeah.
You know, we have to, for example, later today, I'm going to my granddaughter's high school graduation. It's a 3 hour deal. It's not going to be fun.
Right. You're there
You
for
know,
that 3-minute moment, right? You want to capture that. You also don't want to go to the washroom at that point. So it's you're
right.
like literally like, yeah, but it's 3 hours watching all the pomp and circumstance. It's probably gonna be,
So, you
yeah.
know, where do we, in a situation like that, how can we internally remain aligned while we're in a situation that externally is not the most comfortable situation in the world?
Hmm.
And, in traditional human design, if, certainly when Ra was around, if somebody was a generator and got an I don't want to go there, they wouldn't go.
Hmm.
And that's irresponsible.
Yeah. You're it's your grandchild, right?
Right.
Yeah. They want you there. They would be
Exactly.
if you didn't
And
go.
being there to honor the all of the times she didn't want to be in class, where
Hmm.
she had to do stuff that she didn't want to do.
Hmm.
It's like we're paying a respect to that. We're
Hmm.
paying a respect to the fact that somebody has gone through and jumped through all the hoops to get something that the culture values.
Hmm. So many ways we can go here. So what's, just as a question, like you're going to be there for 3 hours. It's going to be a long time. What is your approach? Do you have a strategy for, I'm gonna, you just grin and bear it? Do you do little, I'm just curious.
Um, I go into it open without an expectation,
Hmm.
and I'll be quiet inside and just be,
Hmm.
um, without thinking. I'll just be present.
Hmm.
And it's about our granddaughter. It's not about us or how we feel or all the restrictions they've put on how we can get into the Coliseum. I mean, you know, it's it's to be present with her soul
Hmm.
and to remain tuned in to her the whole time. So I put myself aside, I put my feelings aside, and I stay in the healing modality of being present.
Hmm.
That's it.
Interesting.
And so I
I,
don't pick up energy from the group.
so there, okay, because energy is, everything's energy. Um, so you're going to be in this large place with a whole bunch of people, a whole bunch of energy around you, picking up on all those things, right? To me, acoustically, that's a nightmare, right?
Not for me.
Right.
I go into a focused mode. I don't hear anything around me and I don't pick up anything from around me
So you,
because I've sealed my aura.
okay, perfect. How do you seal your aura? I've explored certain things, and some have actually worked, but I think for a while I didn't wasn't sure I believed, and now I do. Like I need to protect my aura. I definitely realize I'm becoming more and more sensitive, which I appreciate because it's given me incredible intuitive capabilities I didn't have before, but it comes at a cost of holy cow, I can be drained quickly or take on someone else's energy and not even recognize it isn't my own. Like there's
You have to open your field to take on energy.
okay.
Most people do it unconsciously. They attend out there. So even, let's say, driving in a car, um, so many people when they drive are watching what other people do.
Hmm.
I don't watch what other people do. And even at this gathering tonight, I don't care what anybody's doing. I'm not going to look at anybody
Hmm.
unless I specifically want to. If I don't want to engage with someone, I won't look at them.
Interesting. Do you actively not focus on them? Are you just so, like you said, you're there to be with your granddaughter's soul, right?
The only energy that I will be sending out will be to my granddaughter.
Hmm.
The family will be in a bubble, and then the rest of the energy is directed only toward her.
Right.
I'll see everything going on, but it's like there's a channel or a column through which we relate, and that is not broken.
Hmm. So you
So you
have.
stay connected with what you want to be connected with, and you release everything else,
Mhm.
and you do not engage with it.
Yeah, I think that's something I've been practicing lately. I guess you've been doing it a long time, so it's just second nature. Like you, until I even ask the question, I'm guessing you don't even think about it, right? You just go there and I'm here for my granddaughter, my family's, this is our bubble, this is what I'm here, and then when this is over, I'm getting the heck out of here because
Right.
it's too much. Yeah. It's so interesting. I mean, I just didn't do that before. That wasn't how I approached the situation. And in
We
fact,
don't train children to know how to handle their energy.
mhm,
Um, I shared in the webinar one week that we were at lunch with a couple who had a 7-month-old baby. And it was very clear to me that the baby sees energy and was responding to the energy around her. And the
mhm,
parents were oblivious.
mhm,
And then the mother at one point said, well, the only time my child gets really upset is when I put her in the car seat and I strap her in. And I said, well, what do you say to her? And she said, well, I tell her how sorry I am that
mhm.
that I have to do this. And I said, do you read her energy? Have you told her that you understand she feels trapped and that she doesn't like being confined? No. I said,
Mhm.
well, read the energy and acknowledge it. And once you acknowledge it, it releases.
Right. So when she's talking to the child, even though the child may not understand the words, like it's the intention of saying it because you're saying it with intention and being like, I know you don't like being strapped in this seat, and I know it's uncomfortable, but this is for your safety. And so it's even just saying it to a child that isn't going to hear the words, but they would get the intention.
Parents need to be visible and transparent with their children in
Hmm.
order for children to learn the language of energy.
It's interesting. My mother's a manifester. My father's a generator. I've heard, that ideally
In
type.
composite
It's a
or
good
only the
question.
mental world?
I've only ever looked at their stuff in the mental world, so yeah,
You
they're
get,
probably both manifesting generators. True. Yeah, yeah. So amazing, and my brain just still goes to that mental place. That's the. I think part of it was. So that's so interesting, right? If the majority of people are manifesting generators, can kind of dismiss the whole mom was this and dad was that. It's such an interesting time. Still, uh, still
you
very
see,
much.
but you're labeling your parents as
Mhm,
something, and that gives a misperception of who they are as a complete person.
mhm,
So the question is, how does their energy move?
mhm,
And where is their strength? And how do they connect with themselves? Because this is not about how we function in the world, it's how we connect with ourselves to function in the world.
mhm.
And that's a nuance that's very important because who cares how somebody else perceives us?
I used to care, but I had to
Well,
go to
of
work.
course you cared because all you were used to was being perceived in the mental world.
Mhm,
And so the rest of you it was sort of pushed under the rug, so to speak, and told it didn't exist.
mhm.
And then a whole part is hurting. I've been a clinician for long enough that I know that the real pain is that people don't feel perceived.
Mhm. Like everybody.
Most people, yeah.
Oh,
It's
sorry,
rare.
most, right? Yeah, yeah. Um, let's stay on the topic of energy, and so between qigong, Reiki, Um, even where do I want to go with this? I mean, I know when we first connected today, we were talking about I've already forgotten. It's not incarnation crosses. It's what do
Patterns
you
of
call it?
orientation.
Patterns of orientation. And so we were talking about my wife and her the flow, and then like mine is Sphinx to Maya, and I don't fully comprehend that notion yet, but I recognize it's important. So I would
Which
love to.
notion? The key words or the flow between the charts?
Honestly, both. Right now, my mind hasn't connected the dots. You know, like what I think of Sphinx and Maya, and then moving between the worlds. I don't know how to make sense of that.
The charts that I use show a process. They're not frozen in a given moment. They're snapshots of what happens in early development as we're being imprinted by cosmic energy. If you use profile in the mental world, you're picking two lines out of the hexagram
Mhm,
that are the lines of the sun, prenatal and prenatal and natal, and the earth, the sun and the earth. That makes an opposition in the wheel.
mhm,
But it's a fleeting moment in time. How can one fleeting instant in time define your whole life?
mhm,
It's not logical.
mhm,
It's not real. We are living, breathing people. Every breath, we're a different person.
mhm,
So, what I've done is because I have 8 charts with different calculations, I look at the keywords for each cross, which I call a pattern of orientation.
mhm,
Why? Because the language of the meaning of the hexagram is moving. It's the sun is moving. So within a few minutes of birth, it's already out of that cross,
mhm,
moving on to something else. And we're beings who think and live in process, like the breath, in breath, out breath. So I took the keywords of all the 8 crosses and I said, well, this is interesting. From 3 months before birth to a week before birth to 2 days to an hour and a half. And then on the other side, as above, so below, past, present, future, we're looking at somebody's process.
mhm,
And that process, if they reflect on it, tells them something very important about how the cosmic energy, as it was moving through their development, informed their process.
mhm.
And so when you read the words, and what's your first current?
Mental is Sphinx, and
Okay,
then
so Sphinx is self knowledge. That's what the Sphinx represented. So the question that I ask of somebody who has that cross is, when self knowledge, what kind of self knowledge is that self knowledge? And how do you know what you know about self knowledge? So
mhm,
take those key words and take them inside yourself and learn what the cosmos was trying to tell you at that moment of impact on your consciousness.
uh, I mean,
It's a
that's
different way of using the information.
for sure. But like that, maybe in a really, I'm just going to say it. Honestly, if I'll just use YouTube as an example. If I'm stuck, I go onto YouTube and I refresh, and whatever is being presented to me next is generally the piece of information I needed. It's just like it's, and I know there's an algorithm and I know there's AI and all this stuff, but like no, it's been like where my curiosity was taking me or something. It's the next piece of information, and it might be someone's podcast, and so funny. But when I look at how the information comes in, I'll be like, oh, that's a 2 hour podcast. I don't have the energy for that. I don't have the time for that. But I'll just click it and start, and I'll just kind of thumb around, and then all of a sudden, I'll just land on a part of it where it's like that's exactly what I need to hear. And then, but for a while there, I'd be like, oh, there was a nugget there. There must be more. So then I would stay the course and finish the whole thing and be agonizing. And I'd be like, ugh, I got nothing on the rest of that. Whereas I've learned to let go of that and be like, that's what I needed. Is this is this interesting right now? Is this what I need right now? And I'd be like, no, and I just move on. And I trust that if I need whatever else is in that particular piece of knowledge, self knowledge, it'll return.
Mm-hmm.
As I say that, I so when there's so I'll just say it. There's a new movie that came out a couple months ago. It was a Willy Wonka movie, like the whole Willy
Mm-hmm.
Wonka chocolate factory, and it was fantastic. I actually really enjoyed it. And there's one little scene where Hugh Grant is this Oompa Loompa guy, and he's about to have a nap, and Willy Wonka's just sitting down, and he's thinking, he's like being in a creative thing, and he said, and the little Oompa Loompa like pulls his mask off and goes, "You said like what is it?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing." And so then he goes, lies down again, and then Willy Wonka's there thinking, and he goes, So he's like, "Okay, you said twice. It must be important." And then I'm noticing that now, even with my wife. I was so if she said I would drop everything. Like, what is it? Oh my god, what crisis do I have to solve? Whether it was like I got to empty the dishwasher or the dog needs to go out. And I've been even playing with like waiting for the second because I was just so hyper alert, listening for danger that I couldn't even enjoy the moment. I was just like on pins and needles all the time. And even that has been this strange exercise at this to go through that at this age. Like I feel like that's something that I would have intellectually or at least been able to do when I was 4, but for whatever reason that didn't exist. I was just on high alert all the time, ready to respond, ready to put out everyone else's fires, except even my own.
Mm-hmm.
It's it's as I say, it's like the word I'd use is agonizing to me, frustrating to me. That's taken this long to figure out something that simple. But it's now a felt thing. It's a trust thing. I think, when you describe being at this event and how you're able to just like tune everything else out, that sounds wonderful. And I'm kind of already going that direction. I can sense that. And so even just this conversation is that nudge that like I'm on the right track. Um, and to trust in that, not default back to that. I wouldn't even say it's a comfortable position. It's just the only thing I knew. It was what seemed to be right, and it never was. So, hmm.
It was also you attempting to connect
Hmm.
and engage.
Yeah, and that shyness of not even wanting to engage, and then
Unless there was a reason for you to engage.
hmm
So you'd wait for the
hmm
and then you had something to respond to.
hmm
So if you think back, Sean, to your early childhood, maybe you can find where that came from.
I've become very good at exploring that. Um, can you say that again? What if I were to go into the Wayback Machine? What
Let
what?
me say it, let me say it differently.
Yeah.
Emotions are part of the mental and physical world. So if you track back and say, what does this remind me of from my past? You're likely to find some pattern that you were taught in order to manage your curiosity, your need for approval, your want for control, your way of gaining attention.
Mhm,
I mean, we could go through a whole list of all the possibilities of where did this pattern come from,
mhm,
but it's an emotional pattern of looking to please somebody
mhm,
with your actions. And that is something that you were taught.
mhm,
And thinking about whether it serves you and whether you need to be that person allows for you to choose.
mhm. Certainly, as an adult, I don't need to be that person. And I think that's part of, you know what I mean?
But you maybe be have to be that person in some relationships. And you may choose to do that in some relationships.
hmm, that's interesting. Yeah.
What makes that interesting?
The fact that I have a choice to choose when to do that. I think it
Yeah.
was a default state. It was, this is my role, is to be a doormat for for everyone and everything. Yeah. And like I've spent a lot of time reflecting on stuff like this, but not that specifically. I didn't even think I was a doormat, you know, but I was. Um, yeah,
And are
just
you now?
much less so. I mean,
And what
even that,
difference does that make?
huge, huge. So I'll tell you, I'll give you an example, and it was very interesting last night. I went to a local uh, business support group. So we meet at a local coffee shop once a month, and because we're in a little small community, and it's businesses supporting each other, and so lots of interesting people there, and we kind of go through all the motions of everyone says what they do, and but like it's a good group, and it's not just one of those sad business mixers. It's nicer than that. But there was a woman there that I met a couple of months ago, and I you know I don't want to. I don't think she'll ever hear it, but this person seemed like someone that would be good to interact with business wise. She has a skill that would have been valuable to have at our location here. And so I went over and I was just friendly and said, "Hey, would you ever be interested in offering your services here sometimes?" And at the time, she was so dismissive and like she had just bought this business and was like, "No, I don't need anything." Da, 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 da. And really, I spent 15 minutes watching her argue with someone over a new washer and dryer she got. Right? It was just this weird interaction. And so that was the end of it. And I left going, well, that was a waste of time. That's strange. I was told that this person wanted to meet about this, and then she just dismissed me. Well, last night we're at this group and everyone does their introductions. And then she comes up to me and I'm there with my friend and a few other people that know me. And she says, hey, I reached out to you once to offer my services at your place, and you never got back to me. And old me would have been like, oh, sorry. But I was like, no, that's not correct. 2 months ago, I walked to your office. I heard that you were interested in meeting. I said to you, I think that's great. Let's figure it out. And you spent 15 minutes bitching about your washer and dryer and completely dismissed me. And I left going, well, this person has no desire to do anything. So I just stated exactly what happened.
Mm-hmm.
And she first kind of was like affronted, and then she completely backed off her argument. Like whatever argument she built in her mind, she dismissed it.
Uh-huh.
And then all of a sudden, we had this amazing conversation. Um, we were supporting each other as businesses. It was, and it ended with a hug. And old me wouldn't, not old me, I didn't stand up for that before. I would just be that doormat, be like, well, you must be right. I must have had it wrong. And this time I was like, fuck no. This is what happened. I remember it very clearly. I remember the feeling I had of being like, what a waste of time that was. Why did this person want to connect at all? And when I stood up for myself, she shifted. And it was almost like she needed to hear that. She needed to have someone say, cut the shit.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And it was a very, it was a moment that I realized I've had many times in the past, but didn't approach it whole. So I would
So
be,
if you look at it from the four worlds perspective, how do you analyze it? First conversation, which world was she in?
that's a good question. Not physical. She's probably in the mental world. She was frustrated. Is frustration part of the mental world, or is that an emotion?
It was
Like,
in mental world, emotional reactivity.
mhm. Yeah, she wasn't present. And I showed up. No, she knew I was coming, but she still wasn't ready to interact. I think she was obviously frustrated by the situation she was in, and it completely clouded even her memory of what happened.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I kind of took her back to there by owning, not owning, standing up for what was actually factually correct.
So
And
what world were you in?
it wasn't mental.
No,
It
it
was,
wasn't.
yeah. I mean, I said to my friend afterwards, it was like my backbone snapped into place. It was like, so I don't know if that was a physical sensation. I felt it physically, but not imagine, I suspect that was the spiritual, right?
Emotional, spiritual,
Okay.
that axis where
Okay.
where you were not willing to go to the emotional reactive because you saw a possibility of spiritual collaboration.
Hmm.
And so when you spoke up, it wasn't defensive.
Mm.
It was testing whether or not she could enter a spiritual space with you.
Hmm.
That's why at the end you hugged.
Hmm. There was a bond. Like it was a very we our interaction next time be very different.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, yeah, and it's funny. My friend he's in from out of town, so he was there like as a just hanging out with me. And I went home and talked to Wendy about it. And I was like, "Yeah, this is this interaction I had." And he was like, "Yeah, man, it was uncomfortable, right?" But then it was like he was just like it was diffused. It was done, and the energy changed. Like it completely shifted. And I look back and there's been a lot more of that, but yesterday was a real like no, like when you say I know what I know when I know it, it was like that was like it was like foot down. Nope, not going to tolerate this. It was already shitty last time. If you think you're going to take another piece out of me, that's not happening. Like I don't need this. And in the end, far better outcome. So yeah, it's the discomfort in the past which from what I understand, that, I mean, that is the solar plexus, right? Is, avoiding conflict and truth, so as not to feel that sensation and emotion that's, is that, can be a powder keg kind of thing. um, yeah.
If you don't confront the emotional reactivity and transform it, it festers
Mhm.
because
Yeah,
it's
engage.
unfinished.
Hmm. Okay, so you've asked about, where these things started, so I'm going to share this too because it came up yesterday because of this. About a year ago, I finally disclosed to my parents that I was, using plant medicine to come online, let's just say, or at least to awaken. So I was someone that never smoked a cigarette in my life. The first plant medicine I had was at 50, and it was like a surrender. I went all in, and it was one of those experiences that people talk about where it just like shook you to your core. And I was introduced to human design that weekend. Like it was empowering, overwhelming, and so much. Sean, the 51-year-old, still had to take a year to build up the courage to say to his parents, "Hey, I do drugs," because that's what they see, right? I grew up in the 80s, the war on drugs. It was, if you smoked a joint, your head might literally burst into flames. That was the fear mongering, at least in Ontario at the time. So, um, and it took so much energy to even disclose this to him. Like we were sitting at a pub, it was just like we were just hanging. I don't even think I went there with the intent to share it that night. I just knew I needed to. And there was like an inner voice saying, "Now, do it now, do it now." And it was like for the third time, I was like, "Oh, okay, I'm going to do it now." And what was very interesting is I told my parents about the experience. Probably took 3, 4 minutes to kind of give it to them. There was that emotional, "Oh my God, what are they going to think?" Well, part of it's like, you're an adult. Like you have your own house. You're like, shouldn't be this hard. Um, my mother responded with, "What did I do wrong?" That was her first, right? Or what was this my fault? And I was like, "No, I mean, yes, but no, right? Like, no, this was something I needed to do." My father said, "You know what I do when there's a problem? I just stuff it down." And like, even after all that, that's what my father said. And I was like, "Oh man." I mean, that's what I learned, was to just pump that gunpowder into the keg. And I think I just recognize that so many people do that. And but I mean, that's where I learned it. I learned it from my father. He didn't mean to. He learned it from his father. My grandfather was a very stoic. It's funny. I look at the word stoic differently now. But at the time, I would have said a stoic man, like a very proud man, very always dressed proper, very British, all that. Um, yeah, I mean, that's where it's definitely was learned. Yeah, fascinating.
So, after telling your parents that you use plant medicine, what changed?
That day,
Or since then?
oh, I mean, tons of things have changed. Um, for
With
me, it
them?
was for them. A little bit of curiosity about it. No, no, that's a whole thing. But I was released. I was freed. Uh, I grew up. It was a bit of breaking the mother wound, the father wound, all that stuff. It was very. That's so interesting. So many times in my life where I've had to deal with confrontation with my parents, I would always, or if I would need to make a decision that they didn't agree with, I had learned to say, "I'm not asking you, I'm telling you I'm doing this." And I had only done like 4 times in my life. And each time was, it was terrifying. Yeah. But that day I wasn't like asking them because I'd already done it. I wasn't even telling them. I was informing them, and I need to be somehow free of what felt like shame or something, to explore and do that.
And do they appreciate it at this point?
Slowly, yeah. I think it's terrifying to them. I mean, they have their conditioning. They have.
Have you talked to them about their fears and their judgments?
Yeah, I'd say a little bit. Certainly never sort of sat down and did it. I wouldn't say there's a lot of reception to that. Um,
They're
yeah, but
uninformed,
hmm
so they need to be educated.
hmm
If not by you, by whom?
yeah, it's got to be me. Yeah, I'm doing it in little ways for sure. Um, uh, Plant medicine, spirituality, and even just doing the simple things that every one of us is entitled to do: yoga, move your body, breathe, take time for yourself. That's not something they are aware of or believe in. My mom was a nurse in the 70s and 80s in ER, so just saw death every day. Um, Believed that whatever a doctor said was the only thing that mattered. Like there was rigidity. Um, Even now, right? They're late 70s on a whole bunch of medicines, and each medicine is like this medicine causes side effects with that medicine, with this one, and so they're just on all these cocktails of things that are killing them. And I can't even get.
And I assume they've had the vaccines.
Yep, yep, and we're diligent, like up to 4 boosters or whatever. So what, right? Yeah.
Have they had compromised immune system from it?
It's hard to say. I mean, they're in their late 70s, and my dad's always had high blood pressure and all these things. So he seems on track for, the same history of health. It's just an evolution. So I don't know that the vaccines have really changed it, although I would be willing to bet they have. Um, yeah. Yeah, it's a there was one day where I went on a little rant about the medical system in Canada, and my mother actually kind of agreed with me, but she said, "I wish you could say it a different way. Like, why are you so harsh about it?" But to me, it was like I'd reached a point of like this was just like there was no time to fritter about and go, "Oh, everyone's trying their best." Like it's like this is messed up, and it's not okay. Um, so yeah, there's been little pockets of reaching, connecting, but there's a lot of uh, not training. Yeah, I think being a nurse in the 70s and 80s, it was a whole different ball of wax. It was the doctor's right. Don't even argue with the doctor. He's very busy. He's very important. You know, and
Well,
it's
it was more pure in those days.
mhm.
It became much more deep state after that.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. I mean, certainly the medicine in the 70s and 80s wasn't so much pharmacy. There was still actual, I want to say classic. Um, I mean, we've had the things that are coming back, or at least from my perception, like yoga is coming back, breathwork's coming back, working with sound is coming back. It's been there forever. It's more like we were taught to disregard it, meaningless. not the quick way to get things done. There's no money in that. Um,
No money in that. Big pharma.
yeah, yeah, it's sickening for sure. Yeah, it's very very frustrating to observe it and what to do about it.
Only if you engage with it.
Okay, expand on that, please. What do you mean?
Um, it has nothing to do with you.
Mm,
So all you need to do is do what you know is right for you and not engage with those things that are not right for you.
mm.
And it's simpler to do than you think.
How is it simple,
You just
or
say
how?
no.
Mm. Can you give me some examples? What am I saying no to? Am I saying no to paying taxes? Am I saying no to?
No, because you have to live in your society.
Mm,
But you do not have to say yes to things that intrude on your space
mm,
and your health and your consciousness.
mm. That's interesting. I've done that a few times recently. I don't know if you know this, but I've definitely had lots of gut issues, and I had diverticulitis at 35, which was rare apparently. But of course, that was my trip. But after having stomach surgery and having my gallbladder out, I started getting urinary tract infections all the time, and I learned to manage it by using my metaphysical book, getting to the root of it. And like I could turn it, much as I would get it and I'd be on antibiotics for weeks at first. Once I tied the metaphysical to, what bladder and urinary tract infection, the idea of being pissed off and reading it and taking it, I could get rid of a UTI in 4 hours. Like,
Mm.
I'd suffer for 3 days, and I'd be like, "Oh, this sucks." And I'd be like, "Oh, dig out the book, read it. It's a paragraph," and then I'd read it, and 4 hours later, it was gone. Like, and I can repeat that. Why am I telling you that? There's a reason. Oh, yes. So, I was curious. Like, was there something physical in my body that was still causing that to happen? So I went in and had, they shoved something up my butt. They shoved something up the front. It was all very uncomfortable. And the specialist discovered there's a tiny little hole between my bladder and the rest of my body. So I could get toxic. And I definitely realized that when I get highly stressed, that hole seemed to open more. And so there'd be
Mm-hmm.
toxins entering my body. So I go, after all these tests, the surgeon, the specialist said, well, the procedure is, surgery. We're going to cut about an inch out of your, I don't know what he was going to cut, but he's going to take like a full inch out. And then when we seal that off, you won't have this problem anymore. But he said, there's a 10% chance that it won't go well and you'll have a colostomy bag for the rest of your life. And I was like, I don't want that. That doesn't sound good. And I've been butchered enough inside that it's not a path I want to take again. So I said that to him in the office, and he was so, like I said, I don't want to do that. Is there an alternative? And he said, well, there's another technique that you can do that's slightly less invasive, but we don't do that anymore. I was like, well, I'd like to know more about that, And oh, it's not even a choice. And I said, well, no, isn't. Like, can I get a referral somewhere else if you're not willing to do it? And of course, this doctor was offended that I dared go against.
Ask.
Right, yeah. And at the moment, I was like, "Am I making the right decision?" I knew I did, which was like, "Screw this!" Like, if this guy is literally just, "Oh, cool, I get to, tell another story about how I saved someone," like I felt like a set of golf clubs. I didn't feel like a human being. Like I was his next uh, purchase. That's how it felt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, that was a moment that even now I'm like, did I make the right decision? I think I did. I still get the odd. like if I get stressed, I can sense, oh, there's that feeling. Like, and with irritable bowel, it's basically like when you pee, you just can't finish, right? And it's agonizing after days. um, but I can turn it off like that now. And so I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. And as I get healthier all the time, I trust that that's going to become even less of a
Mm-hmm.
repeatable. So yeah, like I've definitely learned to heal myself in many different ways. I'd
Mm-hmm.
actually had shingles and was told I'd, have it for 4 months. Whipped out my book, had some CBD, spent time in that space, got curious. It was gone in 4 days. And, you know, I didn't document it at the time. I kind of wish I did because it's kind of like, who would believe me? But it absolutely happened. Um, I need to check even shingles. Like I did not even understand what shingles was, and then I realized, oh, that's left over from the chickenpox vaccine, and I guess it's in you, and can be triggered, you know. And I guess thinking about the vaccine, like what will that trigger later, right? Like what is coming from that
There
shit?
are a lot of dangers from the vaccines for COVID.
Hmm.
Lots. And Marvin and I never had the vaccine. We wouldn't take it.
Yeah.
Um, but a lot of people we know who did take it, their immune system became compromised.
Hmm. Yeah, I got the first one. I got the booster, and then I was done and out. But it was at a time. It was definitely where I was making that transition from being a doormat to not being a doormat. Yeah. So for anyone that might watch this, what are the things you're seeing, or with these vaccines, for example, or what energetically can someone do to
The
return the
va-
system?
well, that's a better question for Marvin than it is for me. But I know from him, he was just this week on a webinar where a group of doctors were talking about what they're seeing from the vaccines and from long COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And the vaccines used a spike protein, and the spike protein compromises the immune system.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and people are having, I mean, we know people who died 10 days after the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
We know people who have had all kinds of medical issues since they took the vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and the infertility is up, sperm count is down, um, lots of ramifications of the vaccine that are not being made public.
Mm-hmm.
So um, at this point, Marvin would not let us get any kind of vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
And with respect to babies, it's pretty horrifying that babies are being given so many vaccines so frequently. And they should never have the COVID vaccine because babies don't die from COVID.
Mm-hmm. When Marvin was discussing this with other doctors, is it ultimately in private, or is it like can doctors talk about this because it's quite literally like the government, you know,
Well,
insists?
we moved from California in April of 2021, and one of Marvin's colleagues called him because one of her patients had an anaphylactic reaction to a past vaccine and was not a good candidate for getting the COVID vaccine,
Mhm.
which was being mandated at her work. So, in ordinary situations, a doctor could have said, my patient had an anaphylactic reaction, she's not a candidate for a vaccine. But doctors who were writing that were losing their license. So the lady, lost her job.
Hmm.
But the doctors, certainly in California, you could not say a word against COVID or you would lose your license. And
Mm.
at this point, um, the functional medicine community knows about it. The biological community knows about it. Um, Doctors were being targeted if they prescribed ivermectin or hydrochloroquine, both of which could cure COVID. And with long COVID, now doctors are having to figure out what to do to alleviate some of the symptoms of people who have long COVID,
Mm.
made worse by the vaccines.
Right.
And it was a webinar for doctors.
Okay. I want to so taking this conversation into energy, taking this into Reiki healing, um, and the energetics of if everything is frequency and vibration in your body. Can I not just intend the vaccine or the ramifications of that energy in my body out of my body? I actually kind of think I can, based on my experiences with other things.
You may be able to, but I can't answer that. I don't know.
Well, I'll answer it with what I've been playing with. I think about a month ago, I probably sent you some light language. I don't know if you're familiar with light language, but it's effectively seems to be folks that are channeling something. Usually, when I see it, it looks like automatic writing. In fact, there's one woman that I follow, and there's something to it. She seems to do automatic writing. She then, and this is on YouTube. She's It'll be a topic. It could be anxiety. It could be, and one of them was COVID vaccine, right? And um, there's just something that I know is real about that, in that it kind of looks like, well, I understand that. I think that automatic writing is kind of Sanskrit, right? It's kind of like the oldest language prior to me understanding language. But it sure seems to me that when I listen to this light language, and she also, what I really love about her stuff is she always writes out about it. So if it was about anxiety, it was like 3 paragraphs, and she seems to be an expert on everything. So at that point, I realized she can't be. She's channeled this and shared this. And so I'll just listen to it. I won't even necessarily worry about hearing it. I've actually put it on in my pocket with my phone and just let my body feel the noises she's making, because it sounds like gibberish, right? But it's fascinating. And I've sat there with the intent of, I want this particular message. And there's been times where I've felt it in my body. I've absolutely, like, something, like the intention was there. Um, and to me, it just seems to be that frequency of letting my body hear it. I don't know how to understand it. Again, I don't care about hearing it, uh, like listening to it. I even tried it like on double speed. Like, I'm in a hurry. Let's do this one quick, right? I'm like, I don't think it matters. I think my body just needed to like take this in
Right.
and with it, right? Yeah, it's fascinating, and to me, it kind of ties into Reiki and energy and all these things, right? Like when I see you and Marvin doing the Reiki movements, to me, when I look at her automatic writing, there's been times where actually I've listened to it and then traced it with my eyes, like with intention. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually going to just like read it as even though it looks like gibberish. Um, and that was an interesting little experiment too. It was like it felt like it intensified it for me. So I guess one is, am I crazy? I don't think so. Two, is this something in my design where I would absorb this information more than someone else, or differently, or could, it feels like a skill I've had, and it feels like something that if everyone could benefit from it, that'd be amazing. But is it something that's more unique to my uh,
You have
particular.
an undefined solar plexus,
Yeah.
and you have an undefined root in all 8 designs. And you're intuitive, and you have the 4629, so you're feeling it in your body. You also have one, two, three, four, five, six. You have 7 gates out of the self center,
Hmm.
which means that you're very committed to higher consciousness and to frequency.
Hmm. With that too, I've got a completely open head and ajna in my mental
Yeah,
world.
so
Well, would that make me extra curious or receptive to trying new things? Like, is that why I'm willing to say, I don't know, this seems nuts, but I'm still willing to explore it, even though part of me is like, I'm just always trying to come to grips with it. I think at this age and this life path that it's still
your
hard.
crown, your crown and the ajna do get connected.
Well, yeah, I
Because
know in the full vehicle for sure, and that's why I guess in the mental world, am I is that a benefit of being completely open in that world to be willing to be that willing to accept something that seems so foreign to me?
it's obviously not foreign to you at all.
No, I guess not. Hmm.
You just didn't learn to deal with it. If think about it, if we grow up without the language of energy, how can we talk about it? And I've shared that when my grandson, who was a preemie, was about 6 or 8 weeks old, and he wasn't looking at me and smiling, and I saw him looking around the room, and I said, "Oh, Noah, you're seeing energy," and he looked right at me and smiled.
Really? Like he knew, even though
He
he didn't know.
knew as soon as I said it, he felt the energy
Hmm.
as an infant. And my first memory is of seeing auras
Hmm.
and of recognizing that my parents didn't know what to do with me because I was responding to something that they couldn't perceive.
That's so interesting. My mother.
So
Yeah.
I think we can't read a chart and say this is what it means. We have to look at the whole and
Yeah.
say, what does this mean to you?
Hmm.
Because you do put information together, but you have to wait to know because you know
Hmm.
what information you want to combine, what information you want to consider, who is in your field. You have the 62. So if somebody has the 17, it's a portal. You have the 56, but you also have the 63-4. So you're not defined, but your brain is always going,
Hmm.
and you're always looking for connections that will make sense to you.
I call it pattern matching. Like it to me, it seems like I spot patterns that others are not seeing, and learning to trust that I can. I think for a long time I didn't trust that I could do that. Didn't believe I could do it, or people convinced me I was wrong. I mean, I it seems pretty clear to me that within seconds of someone giving me information, I can forecast 2 years down the line, like from a business sense. I'm just like, I
Mm-hmm.
already know and I can reverse engineer it. But I've realized that not everyone understands me in that moment because I'll be like, they'll say like, I'm thinking about doing this, and I take a couple seconds and I'm like, I wouldn't do that, and here's why. And I'm so far down the line, they weren't thinking about that at all. And
Mm-hmm.
and I realized that I almost don't have the patience or time to be able to give them how I got there so quickly. Nor did I think I also just assumed that everyone would have gotten there. And so it's clearly something that I can do that is maybe unique to me. I don't know how I harness that and turn that into a something that could fix my career, but that's that
As
feels
a,
like
you can do it as a consultant
hmm hmm
or as a coach, a business coach.
yeah. Well, yeah. So there we go. Let's talk about energy strategy because we were talking about that the other day too. Because the word coach I really struggle with these days, right? It's
Oh,
just
yeah,
everyone.
there's a lot of coaches who are not trained,
Yeah,
most
yeah,
of them.
yeah. So to me, coaching is almost like if as soon as I hear coach, it's a bit of an affront, but not an affront. But you know, I've been playing with this notion of if I were to reinvent my career, I'd like to be an energy strategist because it really is it touches kind of all these things. It's how you interact with people. I've definitely seen how you can interact as a team and move that energy. Yeah, and yeah, there's something about energy strategist and the idea that the world needs some, and um, yeah. So I just don't know what to do next with that, but I know like it just keeps circling like a plane over the, the
Why
airport
don't
waiting.
you write down the things you love doing
Hmm.
and who you love working with
Hmm.
and what kind of businesses you feel you would be enjoy working with?
Hmm. That's a
It,
good.
you have to design, if that's what you want to do, you have to design it.
Hmm.
So then you put yourself in the position of the people you're consulting with, and you need to treat yourself as a client.
Yes. So that's already unfolding because I think I've been doing the work even unconsciously. um, and that was a bit of an epiphany last night. Is I keep digging for more information, more data, more even in the human design thing, I was just never felt like I knew enough to.
You're never going to know enough. How could you
Right,
possibly ever know enough?
right. And that's kind of the fun part about it, right? Is that it's an endless curiosity. Um, I lost that train of thought, but it's I definitely know now that what I did for the last 20 years, I didn't enjoy. It was not spiritually aligned for me at all. The people I was working with, the groups, I'm in a lot of ways I'm in the wrong place, but the people I
What do
love
you
are.
mean the wrong place?
I'm in the wrong
You mean
city
geographically the wrong place?
geographically. Yeah,
Where would
yeah.
be the right place?
Somewhere that had sunlight all year. Victoria is beautiful, and right now it's amazing. So like all of a sudden, it's good to be here. But January through April in Victoria, it is it. I can't be here. This is the capital of BC, so British Columbia. So it's a government town. Um, every client I've ever had has been like provincial or municipal government. And as a computer consultant for 30 years, trying to solve everyone else's problems, they would come to me with a budget. We would try to solve their problems, and they would fight the very intent because technology puts people out of jobs. So they'd have budget, they'd not be happy the whole time because they're literally don't care about the actual initiative. They just want to keep their jobs in these government pensionable lobster potting positions. And so I could never truly get results. I would always get the job done, but there was never any thanks. There was never any gratitude. There was never, and some would fight me so much. They would do such devious things to try to take me out the knees, but I was always a step ahead. So that also made me unpopular because they couldn't actually manipulate me. But at some point a couple of years ago when everything kind of fell apart, I had just hit a threshold of I can't. I realize now I couldn't do that anymore. I couldn't do fake change. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, it completely fell apart when I couldn't do that anymore. And so it's interesting. Like when you say, "Who do I want to work with?" What?
So you might want to change your words.
Mm-hmm,
You saying it fell apart. It didn't fall apart. You stopped wanting to do it.
mm-hmm,
And so you stopped doing it.
mm-hmm,
And when you stopped doing it, it went away. But
mm-hmm,
it didn't fall apart
mm-hmm.
because you could have kept doing it and it wouldn't have fallen apart. So you chose to stop doing it.
I agree with that. It was a series of events that happened. I'm going to say not to me, but for me. Some people that really broke me. Um, did my
They
soul?
didn't break you, they healed you.
Yeah, didn't feel good at the time, but
No, but it didn't feel good because you were not admitting to yourself that you were doing something you really didn't want to do and you didn't like doing.
mm-hmm,
And because you were not, so it's God's hand.
mm-hmm,
You know, if you said, okay, God, what was so important for me that you would have disassembled my business, it would be easy for you to get an answer. I hated what I was doing, and you gave me a gift of getting me out when I didn't have the courage.
mm-hmm. Yeah,
And then that turns the power completely around. It
mm-hmm,
gives you a spiritual GPS.
mm-hmm. And now I can hear those nuances. I can sense them in the moment. Like I was ignoring the hints God's hand, the universe was giving me. In fact, when I
That,
went that shamanic weekend, my guide at the time, I remember him saying, like, sometimes life, like, it kind of scratches you, and then it kind of like is, and then it eventually just hits you over the head with a two by four.
right.
And I mean, that's absolutely what happened. But
Yeah.
I could take a lot of two by fours. Like, it wasn't like one, it was like, give me more. I don't, I'm not getting it or something. Yeah.
Well, it was paying your bills.
Yeah. And it was, I had staff and I was putting their needs ahead of ours. Like like it's embarrassing to admit how what I did over the last 4 years to empower other people, and disempower myself, and then to feel the resentment of they didn't give a shit the second they got a higher offer they left, and like it was brutal. So what a lesson.
But
That's
look at the lesson. The lesson was that they took freedom that you didn't give yourself.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, so good for them.
Good for you to observe it
Mhm,
and to know that everyone is really loyal to themselves before they're loyal to anyone else.
I understand that now. I wasn't. I was never loyal to myself first, ever.
Um, well, if you look at it differently, yes, you were.
Mm,
You orchestrated something that got you out of a situation that you didn't want to be in. You just had to do it ass backward.
Yeah, and didn't know I was doing it. Like I almost
Exactly.
was unaware. It
Yeah,
was,
but your
and
higher self knew exactly.
yes, 100%. That's uh, the faith part, the empowering part. It's taken a long time to recognize that.
But Sean, it's important that you acknowledge the integrity and the wisdom and the intelligence that put you where you needed to be to get what you needed to get to wake up.
Hmm. So is that, when you say intelligence, is that spiritual intelligence? Like my spirit was screaming out at me, and I wasn't paying attention, but it still got the job done.
Yes,
Yeah.
we're
Mm.
always guided by our higher self.
Hmm.
And sometimes we stay in situations unconsciously. And sometimes we make choices that are uncomfortable. And we stay in those uncomfortable situations consciously because we want something that they offer. You know, I hated school.
Hmm. Me too.
I mean, I really did. I was counting in college, I was counting literally the hours and minutes to when I would finish.
Hmm.
And then I took a PhD program.
Sucker.
My higher self orchestrated going to a department where there were 25 of us admitted each year, only 100 people in the whole department, students. And the faculty believed that if the student had a problem, it was the fault of the faculty.
Hmm.
And they gave me carte blanche. So I took courses for 2 years. They weren't bad courses, they were interesting with top people. Um, and I didn't hate them. Uh, but then, third year, my dissertation chairman said, "This is a big study. I'm going to give you all the resources you need." And the rest of my education was independent study
Mm.
with complete support. I never paid for tuition, I didn't pay for my study. Everything was paid for.
Mm.
And I didn't hate it. I was doing something to give me a PhD, extensive study. I didn't care about the study. Um, some of my fellow students wanted to pick exactly the right study that resonated with their soul, that would be their lifelong work. I didn't care. I just wanted the ticket because I knew that if I wanted to do anything with energy, anything with my psychic ability, anything with esoteric knowledge, I needed a PhD for credibility.
Hmm.
So that's what I did. And I taught college for 3 years, and I knew I couldn't do it
Hmm.
because it was teaching students who would then go do a dissertation and teach students. And what was the point of that?
Hmm.
It didn't help humanity, it didn't help people. And put in a lot of work to help people. And I wasn't about to do something that wasn't human,
Hmm.
that was just purely academic. And I think my work with the four worlds shows
Hmm.
that it's not, I could not stay in a mental equation that did not go deep into the energy and the life force and what empowers people.
Hmm.
So, yeah, I mean, I spent time going through programs and to pay my dues, to be initiated.
Right.
And we all have to go through initiations.
Hmm.
Um, Channel 214 in the body graph, the keys of the kingdom, the direction of the self, is the path of probation in the tree of life. And so in the tree of life, you really only have one channel of probation, and the other spokes come out this way. So in the body graph, you have to look at the central column and understand that we're being initiated into higher consciousness. And our task as a human being is to surrender to it and to listen to the part of us that has all knowledge and all wisdom. And we all have that. When we die, and this was shown to me in my first Kundalini experience, when we die, the fear of death is that there's a split-second moment in the transition where we have all knowledge and
Hmm.
we're one with the universe, and then
Hmm.
we forget.
Hmm.
And so our lifetime is about remembering who we are
Hmm.
and how to navigate in a world that is conscious. And you have freedom.
Hmm.
Imagine that.
Hmm.
So, Sean, what do you want to do when you grow up?
It's interesting. I want to play my drums, connect with people, and empower them and myself.
So,
I want
why are you making it difficult?
to um, habit habits can I can change that.
Mm-hmm. It should
Yeah.
be simple. You want to play your drums, go play your drums on YouTube. Get a
Hmm.
following. Do your
Hmm.
thing. The internet has given us infinite freedom that we didn't have before.
Yeah.
And you grew up basically with computers.
Yep. Hmm.
Um, you're probably the first generation that did. You were
For sure.
a teenager when you got your computers.
Yeah. It was like the Timex Sinclair, and I was 10, 9 or 10. And thankfully, my grandfather was a very curious fellow. Like at the time, it was a ridiculous little Radio Shack thing. And I think it was $2,000, and I think it had 2 kilobytes. No, I think he paid $400 for a 2 kilobyte add-on. I mean, that's just how ridiculous that device was, right? It would take like 8 hours to.
I remember going when my son turned 13 and we got him an Atari computer.
Hmm.
And we went to the computer store and it was like a piece of plastic,
Hmm.
very flimsy. And Marvin and I looked at each other and said, all this money for this? And, um, that we were always Apple people.
Hmm.
So every computer that came out, we upgraded. And, my dissertation, I was punching cards in a computer geek when it was a computer building and output, that was this tall.
Hmm.
Um, so, you grew up with your brain being wired to take in a great deal of information.
Hmm.
Where my generation, we didn't have that accessibility.
For sure. Yeah.
And, the kind of books or written word, much more tedious than opening a PDF and reading it.
Hmm.
So because you're the first generation, really, or maybe the second, computer wise,
Hmm.
um, you haven't really fully embraced the freedom of being without the computer.
Yeah.
And yet it opens a whole other world.
Hmm.
So go back into yourself for your pleasure and your joy and your inspiration. And then decide what you want to do with your gifts in a way that does not distort them.
Hmm.
But use them first for yourself.
Yeah. And yeah, some interesting things that you said there. You said you were always Apple people. The first computer I saw was like the Apple IIe, too expensive. We didn't get it, so we got the whatever. But I just was always driven to that company. But then something shifted.
Which company?
Well, just I mean Apple as like a philosophy for developing
Uh
products,
huh.
right? They always thought different, and it. But I actually uh, the first sort of real computer where a family had was called the ColecoVision Atom, and because it didn't come with a manual, I wrote a manual for my family at 14 to so they could use the word processor, right? It was like the daisy wheel thing, and I was just fascinated by it. But then I was a drummer, and drum machines came along, and this technology was putting drummers out of business. And I had a real mental shift of like computers were evil. And there was like a 3 year window where I was like I wanted to be an artist, I wanted to be a drummer, I wanted to be these things. And I actually traveled for a year with a group called Up With People. And in 1991, 92, I had an electronic drum set and we used a sequencer, a computer for the show to provide sound. And back then that was cutting edge. But I went from being this creative drummer to being a machine for a production that had good intent, but it sucked the life out of me and led to a whole bunch of things. And then music was dead for me. It was a whole series of events, being on a cruise ship and a bunch of things. Return back to Victoria. All of a sudden, I need to get a real job. And so I was like, well, I'll become an accountant. And so I signed up for this course and I hated the accounting. Oh my God, I hated the accounting. But half of the day was learning computer skills. It was DOS, it was DBase, it was FileMaker, it was these things. And my wife still talks about it. Like I would come home and I would be on that computer for 8 hours. Like we were dating, and she would just sit beside me and hang out with me while I was creating all these like things, and I was in love with it. But then it became my job, and then I was solving everyone else's problems. But back to that whole. And so here I am back now. Like I'm very good with technology. I've got a 30-year track record of experience of learning everything the hard way and experiencing it. And now I'm at this crossroads where like I want to play my drums, technology. I'm good at it, and you're right. I need to use it for me now, and it's got to be for me. Uh,
The you need to back away from technology, and you need to back into yourself,
mhm,
and the self needs to guide. You have all the skills, but you don't know which of the skills you love and want to use.
mhm. Yeah.
So you need to get rid of the mental world and go in and drum your spirit and
Mhm.
let it speak to you.
Yeah.
Um, have you and Wendy ever had a conversation with the drums?
Uh, I've never thought about that before. What do you mean a conversation with the drums?
Well, when people do drumming circles,
Mm,
it's a conversation.
Mm.
they're drumming and they're synchronizing with each other.
Hmm.
And there's a language in the drum beat. Um, can we pause this?
Sure. Yeah. I'll turn your mic off just so you can talk in private there. Okay, now I
Yeah, but
moved.
I'm going to have to wind up because
Sure.
that was my son, and we have a graduation tonight,
Yeah.
and he wants to leave in 15 minutes.
Uh, I love that today. I mean, every chat's good, but um, yeah, that was very empowering today. Thank you. So why don't we wrap it there? Um,
Okay.
Stick around for a second just so I can say goodbye properly, but I'm
Okay.
going to turn on the little effect here to make it look all pro in production here. See you in a second.